Ladies and gentlemen, or variations thereupon, you may remember quite recently I made what I called a sorceress dress. Here's a picture of it. The thing with that dress is it was inspired by historical dresses but wasn't actually a historical dress itself. But the thing is, the more eagle-eyed viewers of you will notice that I made an error in that dress which historical sewers wouldn't have made but is prevalent in virtually every modern dress. Can you guess what it is? Write it down in the comments if you know. That's right, I forgot to put pockets in. Okay, there's no need for that sort of gesture, alright. I did it deliberately.
You suck!
Let me explain. There are three different possibilities for pockets I could have done with that. Firstly, I could have done the modern pocket that I could just stick my hand in by putting it into a side seam. But it's not really historical, and I was using historical inspiration for making that dress. The other option would have been to do the historical sorts of pockets, which are just holes at the side and then having bags underneath the skirts. But to do that you have to have multiple layers of skirts, and I don't intend on wearing anything underneath other than my underwear. But there was a third option, and something I quite liked the idea of. Rather than having a bag on the inside, why don't I make a permanent bag on the outside? You see, that is supposed to be a sorcerer's dress, and a sorcerer, any good self-respecting sorcerer, will have a components pouch on them. So let's make a bag that looks like a components pouch for a sorcerer's dress, and that's why I didn't put pockets in. Since then I've come up with an idea for the bag that I've drawn here. Now, as you'll see, many of the motifs we've got on here are actually taken from Anglo-Saxon art, in particular the Staffordshire horde. You see, what you may be aware of from my lovely accent is that I'm actually from Birmingham. That's right, that city with the Peaky Blinders. You see, in fact, when I used to go to work uptown, I'd have to drive past the garrison every day. Actually, I'll stop doing that accent. I do need the colonials to actually understand me. But yeah, the Staffordshire horde is something that was found very close to Birmingham. So this is a local archaeological find, and one of the major archaeological finds of the British Dark Ages, the sort of Anglo-Saxon period between the withdrawal of the Romans and 1066 and the Battle of Hastings. So since as this is local culture and something I'm quite fond of, I've taken many of the motifs from the artwork in the Staffordshire horde and tried to translate them onto this bag. Things like the stylized animals and also some of the more geometric patterns that I'll try and put around the buckle strap. And now, one thing I am going to incorporate in there, if I turn my book around, is my own maker's mark, which isn't actually part of the Staffordshire horde. It just signifies that this is something I've made. So the first step is going to be to take some of this, which is wrapping paper that I pick up in bulk once it comes to January, and I'm using that simply because it has a 1 centimetre square pattern on it. And as this book that my very lovely friend brought for me has 2.5mm squares on them, that I can draw onto this and then translate the scale upwards in order to make it fit onto that a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is take this design, transfer it onto there, and then use that as the template for cutting out onto the leather. Okay, so that's all done, and what you may notice from this, or may not be able to notice because I'm not sure how well this is going to show up on camera, but there is a lot of blank space there. This is completely blank here, that central column's blank, this entire section's blank, but the reason that it's blank is because those are the parts that are probably not going to be seen, except for that central column. So that's going to sit in the middle, so that's going to be extra decoration in the centre of that. And then if I fold it all up, you'll see as the parts that are going to be exposed are the parts with the decoration on. So we've got the maker's mark right at the top, the two mythical creatures at the side, and then the decorated buckle straps in the middle, and that's all that's going to be seen. So with all that done now, I've just got to try and find a piece of leather that I can just about fit it on because I want to try and be efficient. Right, so this has been cut out and I have damped this with water all the way along the length, even though I technically don't need it all the way along the length. The reason is if you wet one area and don't wet another, you can normally see the watermark even after you've dyed it, which I'll show you an example of later. So what I've done is I've wet the whole thing and you can just see some lighter patches appearing now, which means it's starting to dry out, which is exactly where I want it. And then I'm going to tape this back down, but tape down strategically so that I can flip up and have a look at what's underneath. And then taking the stylus, I'm just going to mark on exactly where I'm going to be putting the designs, so I've got something to work on. I'm also going to mark on the folds along the bottom, but I'll do that on the opposite side so that I know where to take some out so that it'll fold up a bit easier. Right, so not the cleanest knife work in the world, but I've only done that a couple of times before, and I always try and operate at the limits of my skill because nobody ever went super sane without testing their limits. So that's the swivel knife done on all the detailing around there. So the next thing I'm going to try and do is emboss them in, which will mean I'll probably need to redamp it. So what that's going to consist of is taking a mallet, taking some of these little stamp thingies, placing them at the edge of where I've cut with the swivel knife and giving a good whack, just so that I can emboss down and change the level of the leather around where I've just cut. And by varying the different levels and the different textures of the leather around these designs, then I can create a more interesting sort of three-dimensional effect, because at the minute it's still looking rather flat. So let me find the right stamps I need and I'll do a close-up of what I need to do. So that's where we're at now. I didn't film very much of that because, well, it's for my neighbour's sake, because I don't want to be hammering for longer than I have to, so I only filmed a little bit whilst doing the hammering. So let me explain exactly what I've done. So largely the work was done with this guide, which is angled and pointed at the one side. What I've done is wherever I've cut before, I've put that raised angle into the cut, gave it a few knocks, not super hard, but hard enough to create a proper indent. And I've either gone around the outside of where I've cut or on the inside of the design in order just to create a texture to it. When I've come to large areas like this, I've taken a larger, more rounded one. So this is a softer front, so it won't create that sort of beveled, like waffle shaped texture on it. And I've just hammered in that section there so it's pressed in and not raised. Largely I want to keep it as simple as possible because the dress itself is simple. You can do more sorts of shading to get ones like this little curvy guy who's got a beveled edge, and you can use those to create extra bits of detail and shading, which a lot of people do when they're doing flowers and things, and they'll do an internal like shadow on the curve. I'm not going to do anything like that because I want to, as I said, keep it as simple as possible, despite the fact that some of these look intricate. It's sort of a mix of intricacy and simplicity that I'm going for. So everything's basically done and ready to be dyed now, even the little tab bit that's got a hole punched in, ready for the buckle. So the next job is to dye, but before I dye it, I want to show you why you need to let it completely dry out before you try dyeing it. And the reason is, if you have a look at this belt, this is a belt I'm supposed to be wearing it with. If you see it around the sides, it looks rather streaky and uneven in the dye job, and the reason for that is I wet it to burnish the edges, and then I thought, you know, it's a sorceress dress and this is going to be a belt for that dress, so let's just try dyeing it straight away and see if we can get a contrast between the edges of the belt and the interior, and maybe it can look like a bit of stormy cloud or something like that, very vague. What ended up happening was it just ended up looking a bit streaky, but that's basically why you want to let it dry all the way out before you put any dye on there, and why you want to wet it all evenly and let it dry, because otherwise you'll end up with like streaky, uneven dye jobs on it. Young Dawn has stretched her rosy red fingers across the sky. I've applied a new coat of dye and now it is time to sew. So, no pun intended, the inside of the bag is just going to be a drawstring bag. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how you do this because this is the most basic of beginner projects and there are 101 tutorials about making drawstring bags online. The only difference between what I'm going to do and those basic tutorials is that normally the most basic form of drawstring bags are two pieces that are being sewn together down the sides and then the channel put through the top. What I've got here though is a tube of black cloth. It's just one piece that's been folded in half, and I'm going to do this for two reasons, both of which are aesthetic. Firstly, it creates just the one seam which is going to be hidden then behind the leather on the front of the bag, so it's going to sit like this at the front and you won't be able to see that seam, whereas if I was using two pieces they'd stick out either side and you'd see them either that or they've got to be front and back, which means you have to have a drawstring in the back. And that brings me to the other reason, which is the drawstrings. Having them this way around means they're both going to come out the front and sit either side of the buckle, which is just more aesthetically pleasing, isn't it, than having them sticking out the sides. So let's get sewing. Just going to sew directly down the front and sew the channel in that. When it comes to the bottom, what we have here is a pin in to show how much fabric I've got to work with. This is going to be the bottom of the side seam that I've sewn there. And when it comes to the bottom, what we're going to do is sew these parts at the very base together and then push them in so we create a flat section, and then sew across that opening so we've got sort of a flat base that's going to bulge out at the sides. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to have to size up with the bottom to see exactly where to stitch along the side, and then we'll have pinking shears to come in and finish up that edge. It will mean that on this side I'm going to need to cut down to open up because obviously this side's sealed in, but we can do that no problem with my handy dandy snips. Right, so those are finally cut. The next thing I've got left to do is attach these. I could leave this to the very last step, but I'm going to use contact cement to attach it, and that needs to dry. I also need milk, so I might as well attach it now, go get milk whilst I'm waiting for this to dry. First thing to do is to skive down the very inside of that, because once I've put that in and wrapped around, it's going to get quite bulky there. So I'm going to skive down the inside by just slicing away, not cutting all the way through, but making it thin enough that it's more easily going to bend around. And then attach it to this by first marking up to give the contact cement a place to grip, putting the contact cement on, waiting for it to get tacky, and putting it in place. And there we have it, a leather bag in the style of a components pouch, perfect for a wizard or a sorceress, ready for their next adventure.